Something happened on October 13th, 2025, that has the entire astronomical community either scrambling for explanations or pretending they didn't see it. An interstellar object, the one we've been tracking for months, allegedly sent out light pulses in a sequence that shouldn't exist. Naturally 5, 8, 13, the Fibonacci sequence. And if that wasn't strange enough, this happened on the exact anniversary of one of the most witnessed unexplained phenomena in modern history. The miracle of the sun at Fatima, Portugal. 108 years to go to the day. Tens of thousands of people watched the sun dance in the sky in 1917. Now on that same date, an object from beyond our solar system pulses light in the mathematical fingerprint of creation itself. The golden ratio. While NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory conveniently went offline for maintenance, and while the best imaging system we have at Mars has been down since October 1st, giving just enough time for any convenient data to disappear. So, tonight, we're diving into what might be the most significant development in the 3IATLAS story yet, or the most elaborate information leak designed to prepare us for something we're not ready to see. Either way, what's unfolding right now, hidden behind the sun where we can't observe it, demands your attention. If you find yourself coming back to this channel, please hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed. Only about 30% of our regular viewers are actually subscribed. So double-check that you're not missing future updates and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing our community spread across the globe. The Big Bang of the day Fibonacci pulses on Fatima's anniversary. Let's start with the claim itself, because it's wild enough that even bringing it up requires careful framing. On October 13th, 2025, researcher David Sorida published an analysis stating that 3IATLAS, now positioned behind the sun from our perspective on Earth, was observed sending light pulses in the Fibonacci sequence, 5, 8, 13, three numbers that appear throughout nature, in the spiral of a nautilus shell. The branching of trees, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. There, the mathematics, the expression of phi, the golden ratio, 1.618. The number that seems to encode efficiency and beauty into the fabric of reality itself. Sorida, who's been tracking 3IATLAS through what he calls his hyperdimensional solar system model, claims these pulses correspond to specific celestial domains in his framework. 5 equals Earth. 8 equals what he calls Planet 591, a theoretical body orbiting between Mars and the asteroid belt. And 13 equals the virtues which, in his model, aligns with something he's named after Methuselah, the biblical figure who lived 969 years. Hold that number. We'll come back to it. Now, before you dismiss this entirely, understand that Sorida has made previous claims about 3IATLAS that initially looked absurd, but later gained unexpected support from other data. He's not a mainstream astronomer, but he's also not just making things up out of thin air. His analysis draws from Tesla, from ancient sacred geometry, from Dante's Paradise, so written in 1321, and from orbital mechanics that, whether you believe his conclusions or not, do show some genuinely strange alignments. The timing alone is what makes people pause October 13th, 108 years after the Fatima event. In Sorida's model, 108 is a harmonic frequency of 432 Hz, which various fringe and mainstream researchers associate with natural resonance. 108 times 2 equals 216, times 2 equals 432. These are the kind of numbers that show up in ancient architecture, in the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, in musical scales that predate modern tuning. Whether that means anything cosmically significant, or whether humans just like certain ratios, is the eternal question. But here's where it gets uncomfortable for the skeptics. NASA shut down the Solar Dynamics Observatory's live feed on October 13th. They cited routine maintenance. The timing, though, is the kind of coincidence that makes even level-headed scientists squint. The SDO is one of our primary tools for observing solar activity and anything passing near the Sun. If 3IATLAS were going to do something unusual, while positioned behind our star, the SDO would be the instrument most likely to catch it. And it went dark. Then there's HiRISE, the high-resolution imaging science experiment camera aboard the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. It's been offline since October 1st. HiRISE is capable of resolving objects down to 30 kilometers per pixel at 3IATLAS's distance. During the Mars flyby, that level of detail could potentially reveal structural features, surface composition anomalies, anything that might suggest this object isn't just a dirty snowball from another star system. The official explanation is that one of the camera's electronics units has been failing since August 2023. Plausible, but the timing of the complete shutdown, right before the most critical observation window we'll have for months, feels almost scripted. Add to this the broader context. On October 1st, the United States government entered a shutdown. Over 15,000 NASA employees were furloughed. 2 days later, 3IATLAS made its closest approach to Mars. 29 million km, the best opportunity for detailed imaging and spectroscopy yet. As of now, mid-October, no official HiRISE images have been released. No processed data from the Mars orbiter. No updates from NASA beyond preliminary statements that essentially say it's probably just a comet. The European Space Agency released a few images from their Mars Express and ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter showing a faint white dot. That's it. Nothing with the resolution we were promised. So when David Sarita publishes an analysis claiming 3IATLAS sent Fibonacci pulses on the Fatima anniversary, the immediate your response isn't just, "Is this true?" It's, "Is this a leak?" Sarita himself frames it that way. He openly questions whether what he's presenting is a hoax or whether it's information, being released through unconventional channels to avoid direct attribution. He notes that 2 previous leaks about 3IATLAS that initially appeared fake later turned out to contain accurate information that was only confirmed by official sources weeks afterward. This is the pattern we've seen in other high strangeness. Information appears in fringe communities or through unverified sources. It's dismissed. Then, quietly, elements of it are confirmed through official channels, but never with direct acknowledgement. The phenomenon gets plausible deniability. The insiders who leaked it avoid consequences, and the public is left trying to assemble a puzzle where half the pieces are labeled fiction and the other half are labeled classified. Let's dig into what Sarita actually claims the Fibonacci numbers mean. In his hyperdimensional solar system model, which he developed with his late partner Crystal Menchaca Sarita, there are 9 hidden planets, or orbital resonances, that correspond to ancient cosmological models. Dante's Paradiso describes 9 celestial spheres, each associated with different angelic orders. Sarita maps these onto orbital periods calculated by dividing 591, his proposed central orbital period in Earth days. By the golden ratio over and over, when you do that math, you get numbers that eerily match the orbital periods of known planets. Earth's exact sidereal year of 365. 256 days appears when you divide 591 by 5. The orbit of Mars, Venus, Mercury, even the outer planets, all seem to cluster around these ratios with accuracy that's hard to dismiss as pure coincidence. Sarita points out that 3IATLAS's rotation period was measured at 16 hours, which converts to 969.6 minutes, 969, the age of Methuselah in the Bible. Now, you can argue that with enough mathematical gymnastics. You can make any number fit any pattern, that's fair. But the specific claim here is that 3IATLAS on October 13th transmitted 5/8/13. In Sarita's model, 5 is Earth's position in the harmonic sequence. 8 is the domain of what he calls the dominions. The theoretical planet 591. 13 is the virtues tied to the outermost edge of this inner system. If an intelligence were using this object to communicate, and if that intelligence understood how humans have encoded cosmic order into myth and sacred geometry, then sending these 3 numbers would be a way of saying, we know your models, we know your history, and we're speaking your language. The alternative explanation is that someone on Earth fabricated this data, timed it to the Fatima anniversary for maximum psychological impact, and released it through Sarita to gauge public reaction. That's also entirely possible. In fact, it might be more likely. But then you have to ask, why? What's the benefit of creating a false narrative about an interstellar object that's already anomalous enough without embellishment? If this is disinformation, who benefits? And what's the endgame? There's a third option that doesn't get discussed enough. What if the data is real, but it's not coming from 3IATLAS? What if there's a terrestrial or near-Earth source generating signals that appear to originate from the comet's position? That could be a test of detection capabilities, a way to measure how the public and the scientific community respond to potential non-human communication. It could be part of a broader disclosure strategy, incrementally introducing concepts that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist who's been one of the few mainstream scientists willing to publicly entertain the extraterrestrial hypothesis, hasn't commented directly on the Fibonacci pulse claim. But he has repeatedly emphasized that 3IATLAS displays anomalies inconsistent with natural comets, the nickel-rich, iron-free emissions, the anti-solar tail pointing toward the sun instead of away from it, the mass calculations suggesting an object over 33 billion tons, far larger than its brightness alone would indicate. Loeb ranks 3IATLAS at a 6 on his proposed scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is definitely natural and 10 is definitely technological. A 6 means we should be taking this seriously, not dismissing it out of hand. The Fatima connection adds a layer that makes scientists deeply uncomfortable, because it ventures into the realm of the mystical. On October 13th, 1917, between 60,000 and 100,000 people gathered in the Cova da Iria, near Fatima, Portugal. They'd been told by 3 shepherd children that the Virgin Mary would perform a miracle. What happened next was witnessed by believers and skeptics alike. The sun appeared to change colors, spin, and plunge toward the earth before returning to its normal position. Clothing that had been soaked by rain suddenly dried. Some reported seeing visions, others just the solar phenomenon. Skeptics have proposed various explanations. Mass hallucination induced by staring at the sun, atmospheric optical effects caused by dust or moisture, psychological suggestion amplified by religious fervor. But none of these fully account for the physical effects. The dried clothing, the fact that people in different locations reported the same sequence of events, and the specificity of the prediction made months in advance. If you're looking for a pattern, it's there. A predicted celestial event witnessed by a massive crowd on October 13th, 108 years later to the day. An object from interstellar space positioned behind the sun, at the moment of its closest approach to our star. Allegedly emits pulses that encode mathematical truths humans have spent millennia trying to understand. And the tools we'd normally use to verify or debunk this are conveniently offline. Richard C. Hoagland, another researcher who operates on the fringe of mainstream acceptance but who has a background in NASA communications, calculated the harmonic significance of that 108-year gap. 108 is not arbitrary. It appears in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology as the number of sacred recitations. 108, beads on a mala. 108 degrees Fahrenheit is the internal temperature where human cells begin to die. 108 is a multiple of 9, which itself factors into the mathematics of the solar system's architecture. Hogan suggests that whoever or whatever is behind 3IATLAS understands not just physics, but human symbolism. That brings us back to Dante. Dante Alighieri completed the Paradiso, the final section of the Divine Comedy, around 1321. He described the cosmos as a series of nested spheres, each governed by angelic intelligences and aligned with specific virtues. The dominions, the virtues, the powers. These weren't just poetic inventions. They were Dante's attempt to reconcile Ptolemaic astronomy with Christian theology. Sarita points out that Dante's model, 7 centuries old, maps almost perfectly onto his hyperdimensional solar system when you apply the golden ratio as the organizing principle. Now, 704 years after Dante wrote those words, an interstellar object appears, crosses through our solar system on a retrograde orbit that passes within 5 degrees of the ecliptic, and if Serena's claim holds, transmits numbers that directly reference that same cosmological framework. Either Dante somehow intuited a structure that extraterrestrial intelligences also recognize, or someone with deep knowledge of both human history and celestial mechanics is orchestrating an incredibly elaborate message. The challenge with evaluating this is that we're operating in a near total information blackout. 3IATLAS reached perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, on October 29th. It's now on the far side of our star, invisible to Earth-based telescopes, and will remain so until early December. Whatever it's doing right now, we can't see. The JUICE spacecraft, the European Space Agency's Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, is scheduled to observe 3IATLAS in November using multiple instruments. But that data won't be transmitted back to Earth until February 2026, because JUICE is currently using its high-gain antenna as a heat shield and is too far from Earth to send high-bandwidth data. So we wait, and while we wait, the speculation intensifies. Forums on Reddit dedicated to 3IATLAS have exploded with activity. The theories and alleged leaks. Some of it is noise. A lot of it is wishful thinking. But buried in there are people with legitimate astronomical backgrounds, noticing things that don't add up. One user compiled a timeline of every official statement NASA has made about 3IATLAS and compared it to the actual data releases. The pattern is clear every time anomalous findings are reported by independent observatories. NASA issues a bland reassurance that it's consistent with cometary behavior, but the detailed data that would support those reassurances never appears. The highest images that should have been released by now. Nothing. The spectroscopic analysis from the Mars flyby. Nothing. Even basic astrometry, the precise position measurements needed to refine the object's trajectory, have been slower to update than they were for previous interstellar objects. This could be bureaucracy. It could be the government shutdown disrupting normal workflows, or it could be something else. When you combine the observation blackout with the timing of the alleged Fibonacci pulses with the Fatima, with the fact that 3IATLAS is now in the perfect position to perform a maneuver, we couldn't detect from Earth the shape of a narrative starts to form, and it's not a comfortable one. David Series' warning is blunt if these pulses are real, if 3IATLAS is indeed, using sacred geometry and historical synchronicities to communicate. Then we are not dealing with a random chunk of ice that wandered into our neighborhood. We're dealing with something that knows us, that has studied our species and our myth, our mathematics, and is choosing this moment to make contact in a language designed to bypass scientific gatekeepers and speak directly to the part of human consciousness that recognizes pattern and meaning. The implications of that are staggering. It would mean the Fatima event, whatever it actually was, is part of a longer timeline of contact. It would mean our religious traditions, our sacred numbers, our architectural alignments to celestial bodies. All of it might be responses to interventions we've misinterpreted as divine or mystical. It would rewrite history. But it would also require accepting a level of intelligence and intentionality that most scientists are not prepared to just entertain. It's easier to file this under elaborate hoax or fringe speculation than to seriously consider that an interstellar object might be encoding messages in the mathematics of creation on the anniversary of one of the 20th century's most documented unexplained events. Yet here we are, and the object is still out there, hidden behind the sun, doing whatever it's doing while we sit in the dark, waiting for December, waiting for the juice data, waiting for someone to finally release images that should have been public weeks ago. Think about that for a moment. The most significant potential evidence for non-human intelligence, or at least for something profoundly anomalous, is occurring right now. And we're locked out of observing it by a combination of orbital mechanics, equipment failures, and government shutdowns. The timing is impeccable, too impeccable, so we move forward with questions we can't yet answer. Did 3IATLAS really send Fibonacci pulses on October 13th? If so, how was that data obtained and by whom? Why hasn't it been verified or debunked by official sources? And if it's a fabrication, what purpose does it serve to release this specific narrative at this specific time? The answers, if they come at all, won't arrive until the object emerges from behind the sun. Until then, all we have is the mathematics, the synchronicities, and the unsettling feeling that something is being communicated in a language we've forgotten how to speak. But as we're about to see, the Fibonacci pulses are just the beginning of the strangeness. Because the position 3IATLAS occupies right now, the timing of its perihelion, and what it could potentially do while hidden from our view, might be the most critical part of this entire story. Perihelion blackout, the object behind the sun. There's a window of opportunity that opens exactly once during 3IATLAS's passage through our solar system. A window where, if you wanted to do something without being observed, the geometry of orbital mechanics hands you perfect cover. That window opened on October 29th, 2025, when the object reached perihelion, and it won't close until early December for roughly 6 weeks. 3IATLAS is positioned behind the sun from Earth's perspective, invisible to our telescopes, hidden in the glare of the star that gives us life. And if Avi Loeb's calculations are correct, this is precisely where and when an intelligent object would execute what's called a reverse solar Oberth maneuver. Let's break down what that means, because the implications are genuinely unsettling. The Oberth effect is a principle of orbital mechanics, where a spacecraft gets maximum benefit from a propulsion burn when it's moving fastest, typically at the closest point to a massive body like the sun. For an object entering the solar system at high speed, the best place to decelerate and capture into a bound orbit is right at perihelion. You fire your engines when the sun's gravity is pulling you fastest, and the combination of your thrust and the gravitational assist allows you to shed velocity much more efficiently than if you burned fuel out in deep space. Now, imagine you're an interstellar probe arriving in a system you want to study. You don't want to announce your intentions. You time your approach so that perihelion occurs when you're on the opposite side of the sun from the civilization you're observing. They can't see you. Their solar monitoring instruments are either offline or looking at the wrong wavelength. You execute your burn, drop into a solar orbit, and by the time you emerge on the other side, you're no longer an interstellar interloper heading back out into the void. You're a resident. And they won't know until you decide to reveal yourself. 3IATLAS reached perihelion at 1.4 astronomical units from the sun, roughly 203 million kilometers, placing it just inside the orbit of Mars, but still well within what would be considered the inner solar system. The exact date, October 29th to 30th, falls within a range that David Serena has connected to other significant events, including the traditional calculation of Prophet Muhammad's birth date, whether that's meaningful or coincidental. The fact remains that this object is now in the optimal position to change its trajectory without us knowing. Loeb has been explicit about this risk in multiple blog posts and interviews throughout October. He stated that if 3IATLAS executes a velocity change of 30 to 40 kilometers per second during the perihelion passage, it could reach Earth as early as late November or December. That's not speculation, that's orbital mechanics. An object with sufficient propulsion using the sun's gravity, well as a slingshot, could arrive in Earth's vicinity within weeks of perihelion. We wouldn't see it coming until it emerged from the solar glare, already on an intercept course. The natural response is, but it's just a comet. Comets don't have engines. And that's correct. Natural comets don't. But 3IATLAS has displayed enough anomalies that the question of whether it's entirely natural is no longer absurd. The nickel emissions without corresponding iron, the anti-solar tail, the rotation period encoded in biblical numerology, the trajectory that passes within 0.005% probability of 3 major planets. At some point, the stack of coincidences gets tall enough that refusing to consider alternatives becomes its own form of bias. What makes the current blackout particularly frustrating is that we do have assets in position to observe. ESA's JUICE spacecraft, currently en route to Jupiter, has a relatively clear line of sight to 3IATLAS during November. The spacecraft is equipped with cameras, spectrometers, and particle sensors capable of detecting activity that Earth-based instruments can't see from behind the sun. Observations are scheduled between November 2nd and 25th. But here's the catch. JUICE is so far from Earth right now, and traveling in such a position relative to it can only transmit data through its medium-gain antenna and at a much reduced rate. The full dataset from JUICE's observations of 3IATLAS won't be downlinked and processed until February 2026. That's 4 months from now. 4 months during which, if the object did something unusual, if it deployed smaller probes, if it altered course, if it showed any sign of artificial structural propulsion, we won't know the data exists. It's sitting in JUICE's memory banks, traveling through the outer solar system, but it's functionally inaccessible. Then there's the question of what happens on December 25th. Multiple researchers, including Sarita and Michael Banjanin, have calculated that 3IATLAS will be at what's called Great Pyramid angle in relation to Earth on Christmas Day. The Great Pyramid of Giza has a slope angle of 51 degrees 51 minutes. This angle appears throughout ancient architecture and is often associated with alignments to celestial bodies on December 25th. 3IATLAS will be positioned at this precise angle relative to Earth's position. Now, you can dismiss this as numerology. The universe is full of angles, and if you calculate enough of them, you'll eventually find matches to human structures. But the timing is what stands out. Christmas Day, the symbolic birth of a figure who in Western tradition represents a divine messenger bridging heaven and earth. If you were designing a disclosure event, a moment where an interstellar object reveals itself to a global audience, primed by religious and cultural symbolism, Christmas Day at Great Pyramid angle would be hard to beat. So, Rita goes further. He notes that from October 19th, 2024 to December 25th, 2025 is exactly 432 days. That number again, the harmonic frequency, 432 Hertz, is advocated by some researchers as the natural tuning standard, as opposed to the modern 440 Hertz concert pitch. Whether there's any physical significance to this, or whether its pattern matching is debatable. But the fact that someone calculated it, that the number appears, adds another layer to the synchronicity stack. The intermediate date of importance is December 19th, when 3IATLAS makes its closest approach to Earth. At one point, 8 astronomical units, that's 269 million kilometers. That's still far. Over 700 times the distance to the Moon. There's no collision risk. but it's close enough for serious observation once the object emerges from behind the sun in early December. Telescopes worldwide will be trained on it, if there are any visual anomalies, any structural features inconsistent with a natural comet. That's when we'll see them, assuming, of course, that those images are released. The pattern established during the Mars flyby doesn't inspire confidence. ESA did release photos from the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, showing 3IATLAS as a small white dot against the Martian sky. The images are real. They confirm the object was where orbital calculations predicted. But they show almost nothing of scientific value. No resolution of the nucleus, no detailed spectroscopy, nothing that would help determine composition or structure beyond what ground-based telescopes already revealed. NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, equipped with the high-rise camera capable of much higher resolution, has released nothing. Amateur astronomers have processed publicly available raw image data from the Perseverance rover and claimed to have spotted a faint smudge. In the expected position of 3IATLAS on October 1st, astrophotographer Simeon Schmause stacked 20 images from the rover's Mars-CAM-Z instrument and identified what he believes is the comet in the constellation Corona Borealis. If accurate, that's our earliest look at 3IATLAS as seen from Mars. But it's not official, it's not confirmed, and it doesn't provide the clarity we need. What happened to the high-rise images? The official NASA line is that the camera has been experiencing issues since August 2023, and data processing is delayed due to the government shutdown. Both statements are verifiable. But the combination of equipment problems, government disruption, and the object's disappearance behind the sun creates a perfect storm of plausible deniability. If you wanted to suppress data, you couldn't ask for better cover. If it's just bad luck and bureaucratic slowness, the optics are terrible. Loeb addressed this directly in interviews during the first week of October. He pointed out that the high-rise camera would provide images with a pixel resolution of 30 kilometers, about 3 times better than what Hubble achieved in July at that resolution. If 3IATLAS has any surface features, any geometric structures, anything inconsistent with a fractured ice ball, Hibbards would see it. The fact that we're now weeks past the flyby with no official release raises questions that go beyond normal scientific caution. Then there's the political dimension. On October 3rd, during a Newsmax interview, Loeb discussed the 7 primary anomalies of 3IATLAS. Immediately following that segment, Stephen Miller, then serving as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy at the White House, was asked whether the president had been briefed on 3IATLAS. The question itself is significant. It means the object has risen to a level of attention, where political figures are being asked about it on national television. Miller's response, or lack thereof, didn't clarify anything. But the fact that the question was posed indicates 3/Atlas is no longer just an astronomical curiosity. It's entered the realm of policy consideration. What would a presidential briefing on 3I/Atlas include? Presumably the classified data we're not seeing. High-resolution imagery from military surveillance assets that are never publicly acknowledged. Spectroscopic analysis beyond what civilian instruments can provide. Trajectory models that account for potential maneuvers. And risk assessments. If there's even a 5% chance this object is artificial and potentially directed, that becomes a national security matter. Not because of immediate threat, but because of the implications for humanity's place in the cosmos and the potential for societal disruption if mishandled. The phrase that keeps appearing in discussions of 3IATLAS, among those taking the extraterrestrial hypothesis seriously, is the dark forest. It comes from Lou Cixin's science fiction novel of the same name, but the concept is older. The idea is that the universe is like a dark forest filled with hunters. Every civilization is a potential threat. The safest strategy is to stay silent and hidden, because announcing your presence invites annihilation. If you do encounter another civilization, you strike first, because waiting allows them to potentially become an existential threat. Loeb's paper with Adam Hibbard and Adam Crow, titled, "Is the Interstellar Object 3IATLAS Alien Technology?" frames the dark forest scenario as one possible explanation for why we haven't detected obvious signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. If most civilizations operate under dark forest logic, then any probe sent into another system would be designed to observe covertly. It would mimic natural objects. It wouldn't broadcast signals, and it would only reveal itself when strategically advantageous. In that framework, 3IATLAS, arriving on a trajectory that allows close observation of multiple planets, executing perihelion behind the sun where it can't be watched, and potentially timing its emergence with culturally significant dates is exactly what you'd expect. The probe studies the system. It determines the level of technological development. It waits for a moment of maximum psychological impact. Then it reveals itself. Not through radio signals that scientists can control and gatekeep, but through visual presence that anyone with a telescope can verify. The counter-argument is straightforward: comets do weird things. Outgassing creates non-gravitational accelerations. Composition varies depending on formation conditions in the original star system. The lack of iron in the spectrum could be explained by depletion during the object's journey through interstellar space. The trajectory, while statistically unusual, is not impossible, and invoking alien intelligence as an explanation is a massive leap that requires extraordinary evidence. That's all valid, but the extraordinary evidence bar is a moving target. At what point does the accumulation of anomalies cross the threshold? If 3IATLAS were to emerge from behind the sun in December and show clear signs of geometric structure, would that be enough? If it altered trajectory in a way that can't be explained by outgassing, would that do it? Or would there always be another natural explanation to grasp at? Another reason to delay the conclusion that we're not alone. The historical parallel that comes up repeatedly is the Galileo affair. When Galileo observed moons orbiting Jupiter, it contradicted the geocentric model that Earth was the center of creation. The data was clear, but accepting it meant overturning centuries of religious and philosophical certainty. So, the data was resisted. Galileo was silenced, and it took generations for the obvious truth to be fully integrated. We like to think we're past that, but the resistance to even considering 3IATLAS might be artificial. Suggests we're not as intellectually flexible as we pretend. What's happening right now, in the 6-week window of the perihelion blackout, could be the most important astronomical event in human history. Or it could be nothing, a chunk of ancient ice passing through, behaving exactly as comets behave, and we're projecting our hopes and fears onto random fluctuations in brightness and chemistry. The problem is, we can't know which until the object emerges, and by then, if it has changed course, if it has deployed subsystems, if it has done anything other than follow a ballistic trajectory, it will be too late to prepare for whatever comes next. Loeb suggested that if 3IATLAS shows continued anomalies after perihelion, proposals should be made to intercept it with a probe of our own, not to destroy it, but to study it up close, to image it from meters away, to sample its composition and look for anything that doesn't fit natural formation models. That kind of mission would take years to plan and execute. But if we wait for absolute certainty before acting, the object will be gone, accelerating back into interstellar space, and we'll have missed the only chance in our lifetimes to definitively answer the question. December is going to be fascinating. Amateur astronomers are already coordinating observation campaigns. The moment 3IATLAS emerges from the sun's glare, hundreds of telescopes will be pointed at it. Any visible changes, any new features, any deviation from predicted trajectory will be documented within hours. The scientific community won't be able to gatekeep this one. If something is there to see, the world will see it. But until then, we're in the dark, literally and figuratively. An object from another star system is doing something, or doing nothing in the one place in the solar system where we can't watch. And the tools and systems that should be giving us answers are offline, delayed, or locked behind classification barriers we can't penetrate. The synchronicities are piling up, the timing is impeccable, and the silence from official sources is deafening. Whatever 3IATLAS is, whatever it's doing, we're about to find out if the universe is as empty as we've been told, or if we've been under observation all along, waiting for the right moment to be introduced to our cosmic neighbors or cosmic predators, depending on which version of the dark forest theory turns out to be true. Space and astronomy. The anomalies pile up. When astronomers talk about something being anomalous, they usually mean it falls slightly outside expected parameters. A star that's a bit brighter than predicted. An asteroid with an unusual rotation period. Small deviations that require footnotes in papers. But don't challenge fundamental understanding. 3IATLAS isn't that kind of anomalous. It's a cascade of violations, each one individually explainable with creative reasoning, but collectively forming a pattern that doesn't fit any natural object we've encountered. Start with the anti-solar tail. Normal comets have tails that point away from the sun. This happens because solar radiation pressure pushes the lighter dust and gas particles outward, creating the classic streaming appearance we associate with comets. It's fundamental physics. Light carries momentum, and when photons from the sun hit particles in the coma, they transfer that momentum away from the star. Every comet observed in human history has followed this pattern, until 3IATLAS, images from the Keck Observatory taken on August 24th. 2025 show something different. There's a faint tail extending in the direction of the sun, not away, toward. The researchers at the University of Hawaii who analyzed the Keck data confirmed it. This anti-solar tail, as they're calling it, extends for hundreds of kilometers sunward from the nucleus. The proposed explanation is that larger, heavier dust particles are being ejected from the sun-facing side of the nucleus with enough velocity that they briefly travel toward the sun, before solar radiation and gravity curve them back. It's possible the physics works, barely, but it requires assuming an ejection mechanism more powerful than what we see in normal cometary outgassing. Then there's the issue of what's actually being ejected. Spectroscopic analysis from the Keck Cosmic Web Imager revealed prominent nickel emission lines. Strong, clear, unmistakable. Nickel is not rare in comets. What's rare is nickel without iron. The two elements form together in stellar nuclear synthesis and generally exist in predictable ratios. When you see nickel in a comet spectrum, you expect to see iron as well. 3IATLAS shows nickel, no iron, none detected. Lullaby was quick to point out the significance. The only known process that produces pure nickel emissions without iron is the carbon arc pathway used in industrial nickel refinement on Earth. Nickel tetracarbonyl, a toxic compound used in electroplating and metallurgy. It forms when nickel reacts with carbon monoxide under specific conditions. The process was discovered by Ludwig Mond in the 1880s and revolutionized metal purification. Finding that signature in a comet from another star system is, to put it mildly, unexpected. The research team that published the Keck findings suggested that a natural carbonyl reaction could be occurring near the nucleus of 3IATLAS. Carbon monoxide is present. We know that from James Webb Space Telescope observations, if conditions are right. Perhaps nickel in the nucleus is reacting with that carbon monoxide to form nickel-carbonyl compounds that then dissociate in sunlight, releasing pure nickel gas into the coma. It's chemically plausible, but the specificity of conditions required makes it a very narrow explanation for a very strange observation. The spatial distribution adds another wrinkle. The nickel emission extends to about 600 kilometers from the nucleus. Cyanide extends to 840 kilometers, Both form distinct plumes with clear boundaries, not the diffuse, gradual fade you'd expect from random outgassing. The fact that these two chemicals have different scale lengths suggests they're being produced or released through different mechanisms, or from different locations on the nucleus. That kind of structure implies heterogeneity in the object's composition or activity. Now, let's talk about the water problem. NASA's Neil George Swift Observatory observed 3IATLAS in July and August, measuring water production rates. They found the comet is losing water at roughly 40 kilograms per second. For comparison, imagine a fire hose running at full blast continuously for months. That's the analogy scientists are using. 40 kilograms per second is a lot of water for an object that's still relatively far from the sun. Most comets don't start heavy water loss until they're much closer, inside 1 astronomical unit. But here's the paradox. When NASA's Transiting Exoplanet Survey satellite observed 3IATLAS back in May and June, before the official discovery, researchers stacked over 9,000 images to look for signs of a coma. They found almost nothing. The radio brightness profile was nearly identical to inactive asteroids. No extended envelope of gas and dust. Yet by July, barely a month later, the object, it is blasting water into space at industrial rates. Either the activity ramped up incredibly fast, or the early observations missed something fundamental. The explanation offered is that gas and dust ejected in May wouldn't have had time to form a visible extended coma in the test images. Due to the time delay between emission and detection, possible. But it creates a picture of an object that was essentially dormant when it was 6.4 astronomical units from the sun, then suddenly switched on as it crossed some threshold distance. Comets do activate at different distances based on composition, but the speed of the transition here is unusual. Then there's the composition itself. James Webb observations from early August revealed that 3IATLAS is roughly 87% carbon dioxide, 9% carbon monoxide, and only 4% water by volume of volatiles being released. That's backwards. Normal comets, including the previous interstellar comet 2, I-Borisov, are water-dominated. Water ice is the primary volatile. Carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide are secondary. 3IATLAS flips that ratio. It's a carbon comet that happens to have some water, not a water comet with some carbon. This has implications for formation environment. The high carbon dioxide content suggests 3IATLAS formed in a region of its home star system that was colder than where most objects in our solar system formed. Carbon dioxide ice requires lower temperatures to condense than water ice. If 3IATLAS is carbon-rich, it likely formed in the outer reaches of its natal system, far from its star in conditions similar to our Kuiper belt, but possibly even colder. That tells us something about the planetary system it came from. It had a cold outer region with abundant carbon compounds. What it also raises is the question of how such an object gets ejected into interstellar space. You need a gravitational interaction, probably with a large planet, to kick something out of a stable orbit. The presence of 3IATLAS implies its home system had giant planets in the outer zone capable of scattering material. The size estimates keep shifting, and that's a problem. Early, brightness-based calculations suggested the nucleus could be anywhere from 4 to 24 kilometers in diameter. That's a huge range. More refined observations narrowed it down. Hubble data from August indicated the upper limit is 5.6 kilometers, with a lower limit around 440 meters. That's still a factor of 10 uncertainty. The issue is that we're trying to estimate size from brightness, and brightness depends on both size and reflectivity. If 3IATLAS has a very dark surface, it could be larger than we think. If it's unusually reflective, it could be much smaller. Why does size matter? Because of the mass calculations. Loeb determined that for 3IATLAS to resist the rocket-like forces from outgassing and maintain its observed trajectory, It must have a mass of at least 33 billion tons. That's the lower limit. If you assume solid density, that mass requires a diameter exceeding 5 kilometers if the object is porous like many comets. It would need to be even larger to reach that mass, but if it's compact and dense, it could be smaller. The uncertainty in size translates directly to uncertainty in density, which affects our understanding of what this thing is made of. A large, porous, icy body is consistent with a natural comet. A small, dense object with the same mass starts looking like something else, not necessarily artificial, but at least unusual. Perhaps a fragment of a larger body that shattered in a collision. Perhaps a captured planetesimal with a higher rock-to-ice ratio than typical comets. The possibilities multiply when the data is ambiguous. Rotation period is another piece of the puzzle. 3IATLAS rotates once every 16.16 hours, plus or minus about 3 minutes that converts to 969. 6 minutes, the number keeps coming back. Methuselah's age in the Bible. You can argue coincidence, and maybe it is, but when you divide that rotation period by Earth's exact sidereal year of 365, 256 days, you get 2. 655,457. That's within a fraction of a percent of the golden ratio squared, which is 2. 618, close enough that it's hard to ignore, but not exact enough to be definitive. David Sarita has built his entire hyperdimensional solar system model on these kinds of numerical relationships, whether they mean anything, or whether they're artifacts of human pattern. Seeking is the core question. Mathematics is discovered, not invented, according to Platonists. The golden ratio exists in nature independent of human observation. If an intelligence wanted to encode a message in a way that any scientifically advanced species would recognize, using fundamental mathematical constants would be the obvious choice. But that assumes intention. It assumes design. And that's the leap most scientists are unwilling to make. Without far more evidence, the trajectory itself remains one of the strongest anomalies. 3IATLAS approaches within 5 degrees of the ecliptic plane, the imaginary disk in which the planets orbit. Random interstellar objects should arrive from random directions. The fact that this one aligns so closely with the planetary plane is statistically unlikely. Loeb calculated the probability at less than 1%. That doesn't prove anything by itself. Unlikely events happen, but it's another data point in the pile. The retrograde orbit adds to the strangeness. 3IATLAS is moving opposite to the direction planets orbit the Sun. Most objects in the solar system orbit in the same direction because they formed from a rotating disk of material. Retrograde orbits are rare and usually indicate either a capture event or an origin outside the system for an interstellar object. Retrograde isn't surprising, but combined with the low inclination, it creates a trajectory that's both unusual and tactically advantageous. If you wanted to observe multiple planets without being easily detected, the velocity is consistent with interstellar origin at discovery. 3IATLAS was moving at roughly 61 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. That's faster than solar escape velocity at that distance, confirming it's not bound to our system. As it approaches perihelion, it accelerates to about 68 kilometers per second due to gravitational pull. After perihelion, it will slow again as it climbs back out of the Sun's gravity well if it follows a purely ballistic trajectory with no propulsion. It should exit the solar system at roughly the same speed it entered. Any significant deviation from that predicted exit velocity would be a red flag. The connection to the WOW signal is speculative but intriguing. In 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University detected a strong, narrow-band radio signal that lasted 72 seconds. It was so unusual that astronomer Jerry Eman wrote "Wow" in the margin of the printout. The signal appeared to come from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, near the star group Chi Sagittarii. It was never detected again, despite multiple follow-up observations. Loeb noted that 3IATLAS's trajectory, when traced backward, passes through a region of sky very close to where the wow signal originated. The alignment isn't perfect, but it's within the margin of error, given the uncertainties in both the signal's exact origin and the object's trajectory over interstellar distances. The chance of this being random is about 0.6%, not impossible, but low enough to be noteworthy. If 3IATLAS transmitted the wow signal decades ago as it approached our solar system, the timeline works. The signal was detected in 1977. 3IATLAS is now here. Depending on its velocity and trajectory over the intervening decades, it could have been in the right position at the right time, but that requires assuming the object has been under intelligent control for at least 48 years, maintaining a course toward our system while announcing its approach with a radio burst. It's a huge assumption, but it would explain why the signal was never repeated. It wasn't a beacon. It was a one-time announcement. The alternative explanations for the wow signal include a passing comet that happened to be in the beam, a terrestrial interference that somehow appeared exactly like an extraterrestrial signal, or a natural astrophysical phenomenon we don't yet understand. None of these are particularly satisfying. The comet explanation requires that the comet was outgassing hydrogen at exactly the frequency the telescope was tuned to, which is possible, but requires specific conditions. The interference explanation struggles with the fact that the signal had all the characteristics of an astronomical source, including the expected rise and fall in intensity as the telescope's beam swept across it. Adding it all together, the antisolar tail, the nickel without iron, the carbon-heavy composition, the extreme water loss rate, the inactive early observations, the peculiar trajectory, the rotation period, and coding the wow signal alignment, you get an object that doesn't quite fit anywhere. It is not like the comets in our solar system. It's not like 2I Borisov. The previous interstellar comet is not like 1I Oumuamua, the first interstellar object, which showed non-gravitational acceleration but no visible outgassing. 3IATLAS is its own category. The scientific community is split. Most researchers are cautiously interpreting the data within known frameworks. Unusual composition. Check. Odd outgassing behavior. Noted. Trajectory within statistical bounds. Barely. All explainable with creative applications of comet physics and formation theory, but a vocal minority, led by Loeb and a handful of others, are pointing out that at some threshold explaining away becomes less convincing than considering alternatives. We're in a strange position. The data is good enough to know something is off, but not good enough to determine what the object is, too far away for direct imaging of surface features. Spectroscopy gives us chemical composition, but not structure. We can measure brightness and emphasize, but not directly observe the nucleus. Everything is inference models, statistical arguments, and in that ambiguity, both the skeptics and the believers find room to support their preferred explanations. What would it take to resolve this a close approach mission the kind Loeb has proposed? Sending a probe to intercept 3IATLAS and image it from a few hundred kilometers away. We'd see the surface. We'd detect any geometric patterns, any anomalies in texture or reflectivity. Any features that don't occur naturally, that mission doesn't exist. It would take years to plan and launch. By the time it could reach 3IATLAS, the object would be deep in interstellar space unreachable, so we're left with remote observations and speculation. The anomalies pile up. Each one has a potential natural explanation, but the cumulative weight of them, the sheer number of things that are just slightly wrong, starts to bend probability into uncomfortable shapes. Either we're witnessing an extraordinarily unusual natural object that happens to display a dozen rare characteristics simultaneously, or we're looking at something that requires a different, framework to understand, and the framework we've avoided for so long, the possibility of design, of intention, of intelligence, hovers at the edge of every conversation about 3IATLAS, acknowledged or not technology and engineering. Loeb's alien probe hypothesis. There's the kind of courage required to put your name on a paper titled, "Is the interstellar object 3IATLAS alien technology?" Not the courage to have the idea. Lots of people have wild ideas after a few drinks, but the courage to formalize it, work through the mathematics, publish it with co-authors, and stand by it. Knowing the academic backlash that will follow Avi Loeb has that courage or recklessness, depending on your perspective, and his paper with Adam Hibbert and Adam Krause, posted to the Arxiv preprint server in July, lays out a case that's equal parts rigorous orbital mechanics and science fiction speculation. The core argument is deceptively simple. If you were an extraterrestrial intelligence designing a reconnaissance probe to study a planetary system, without being detected, you would make it look like a natural object. You'd give it a trajectory that appears ballistic, a composition that reads as icy or rocky, and behavior that mimics comets or asteroids. You'd only reveal yourself when necessary, either to complete your mission or when discovery becomes inevitable. 3. Atlas, in this framework, isn't an alien spaceship in the Hollywood sense. It's a Trojan horse, a surveillance platform disguised as cosmic debris. The trajectory analysis is where the paper gets interesting. Loeb and his co-authors calculated the delta 5, the change in velocity required for 3IATLAS to intercept various planets in our solar system from its current path. Delta 5 is the currency of spaceflight. Every maneuver costs velocity, and the more velocity you need to change, the more fuel or energy you require for a probe arriving on an interstellar trajectory. Minimizing delta V to reach targets of interest is critical. What they found is that 3IATLAS passes close enough to Venus, Mars, and Jupiter that relatively small velocity changes would allow intercepts. For Venus, the delta V required is less than 5 kilometers per second before April and stays below 10 kilometers per second through July. For Mars, it remains. It's under 5 kilometers per second through the end of July. For Jupiter, the intercept delta 5 is low, under 5 kilometers per second all the way to November. Those are numbers achievable with chemical propulsion, the kind of rockets we build, not exotic physics, not antimatter drives, just thrust. Earth is the outlier. The delta V to intercept Earth from 3IATLAS's trajectory is always above 5 kilometers per second, and often significantly higher, depending on timing. But here's the twist. Earth is in the habitable zone if the probe is hostile, per the dark forest hypothesis. You don't approach the inhabited planet directly. You approach its neighbors. You release sub-probes. You study from a distance. And if you need to strike, you do so from a position where the target has minimal warning. The dark forest hypothesis frames the entire analysis. It's named after Liu Cixin's novel. But the concept has been discussed in astrobiology and SETI circles for years. The basic premise is that the universe is a competition for finite resources. Any civilization that reveals its location risks being targeted by others, who see it as a potential threat or a source of materials. The logical strategy is silence. You don't broadcast. You don't build obvious megastructures. And if you send probes to other systems, you make them stealthy. Loeb's paper explicitly states they're treating this as a pedagogical exercise, a thought experiment. But the mathematics is real. If 3IATLAS were designed as a dark forest probe, its trajectory would allow it to observe all the major terrestrial planets and deploy secondary craft to them with minimal fuel expenditure. The retrograde orbit, moving opposite to planetary motion, actually provides advantages. It increases relative velocity during flybys, allowing faster data collection before moving out of range. and the low inclination to the ecliptic means it stays in the plane where planets reside, maximizing observation opportunities. The timing of perihelion is crucial. 3I-ATLAS reaches its closest point to the Sun on October 29th, when it's on the far side from Earth. If you wanted to perform a braking maneuver, to enter a bound solar orbit, this is where you do it. The Sun occludes observation from the planet you're most interested in, your engine burn. If you're using conventional propulsion that produces a visible plume, is hidden behind 200 million kilometers of fusing hydrogen. By the time you emerge in December, you're no longer on an escape trajectory. You're a resident. Loeb calculated that a velocity change of 30 to 40 kilometers per second during perihelion would allow 3I-ATLAS to not only capture into solar orbit, but potentially redirect toward Earth, arriving as early as late November or early December. That's not a slow approach we'd see coming for months. That's weeks. And the first indication would be the object appearing in an unexpected position when it emerges from behind the Sun, already on a closing trajectory. The paper discusses the concept of a reverse solar Oberth maneuver in detail for readers unfamiliar. The Oberth effect is a counterintuitive result of orbital mechanics, where propulsion burn is most efficient when you're moving fastest. At perihelion, you're at maximum velocity due to falling into the Sun's gravity well. A burn there gets amplified by the kinetic energy you already have. Is why interplanetary missions often use gravity assists, flying close to planets to gain or shed velocity much more efficiently than burning fuel in deep space. A reverse Oberth uses the same principle to slow down. If 3I-ATLAS fired engines at perihelion, the deceleration would be magnified by the Sun's gravity, allowing it to drop from an escape trajectory into a captured orbit, with much less fuel than the same maneuver would require elsewhere. It's elegant, and it's hidden. The paper notes that the optimal point for this maneuver is obscured from Earth's view, as if the geometry were designed to provide cover. Is that intentional, or are we seeing patterns where none exist? The paper doesn't claim certainty. It presents the scenario as possible. Plausible, even, but not proven. The language is careful. The authors acknowledge that the most likely explanation is still a natural comet, but they argue that dismissing the artificial hypothesis without investigation is premature, and they're right. If there's even a 5% chance, even a 1% chance, that 3I-ATLAS is something other than a comet, the implications are so profound that caution should compel us to investigate, not dismiss. The public reaction to the paper was predictable. Mainstream science journalists largely ignored it or treated it as fringe speculation. Social media exploded. Reddit threads dissecting every paragraph. YouTube videos with alarming thumbnails. The conspiracy community embraced it as validation. The skeptical community mocked it as attention-seeking. And the scientific community, by and large, stayed silent, which is telling. Silence can mean the idea is too absurd to dignify with response. Or it can mean the idea is uncomfortable enough that engaging with it risks professional reputation. Loeb is accustomed to this. His previous work on 1Oumuamua, suggesting it might be an alien light sail, earned him both fame and scorn. He's been called a publicity hound, a pseudoscientist, and a modern Galileo, sometimes in the same article. His argument has always been that science should follow the data wherever it leads, not restrict inquiry to comfortable conclusions. If the data is anomalous, you propose anomalous explanations and test them. You don't suppress the hypothesis because it's weird. The problem, as Loeb's critics point out, is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Proposing that 3I-ATLAS is alien technology, based on statistical improbabilities and orbital coincidences, doesn't meet that bar. The evidence is suggestive, not definitive. It's a pile of anomalies, each individually explainable, adding up to something that feels significant but isn't conclusive. And in science, Feeling isn't enough. But what would constitute extraordinary evidence? Loeb has proposed a checklist, a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is definitely natural and 10 is definitely technological. He ranked 3IATLAS at a 6. To move higher, you'd need detection of artificial signals, radio or optical. You'd need observation of non-gravitational acceleration that can't be explained by outgassing. You'd need high-resolution imagery, showing geometric structures or surface features inconsistent with natural formation. None of those have been detected yet. The Mars flyby was supposed to provide some of those answers. Hera's resolution should have been sufficient to see large-scale structure. The spectroscopy from multiple orbiters should have given detailed composition data. But as we've covered, that data either hasn't been released or shows nothing conclusive. The images from ESA are low resolution, the NASA data is delayed, and the window for observation is now closed for months. Whether that's coincidence or design depends on how much you trust official explanations versus how suspicious you are of information control. Loeb's scale is subjective, he admits that, but it's a framework for thinking about evidence that moves the conversation beyond binary. Is it aliens or not? It allows for gradations. It acknowledges uncertainty, and it provides benchmarks for what additional observations would move the needle if 3IATLAS shows a delta 5 change after perihelion. It jumps to an 8 or 9 on the scale if it broadcasts a signal. It's a 10. It just continues on a ballistic path and fades into the distance. It drops to a 3 or 4. Unusual, but probably not the engineering challenge of building an interstellar probe. Is worth considering. With our current technology, we can barely send spacecraft to the edge of the solar system. Voyager 1, launched in 1977, is now over 24 billion kilometers from Earth, traveling at about 17 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. At that speed, it would take roughly 75,000 years to reach the nearest star if it were aimed at one, which it isn't. To cross interstellar distances in a reasonable time frame requires either extremely long mission durations, generation ships or probes that last millennia, or much higher velocities. 3IATLAS is moving at 61 kilometers per second. If it maintained that speed, it would take roughly 20,000 years to travel 1 light year, the nearest stars to its origin point. Assuming it came from the thick disk of the Milky Way, are likely dozens to hundreds of light years away. That implies either a mission duration of millions of years, which raises questions about power sources and degradation, or that it accelerated and decelerated multiple times, which requires enormous energy reserves. Unless it didn't travel from another star, there's a hypothesis less discussed but worth mentioning, that interstellar space is populated with orphaned objects, ejected from planetary systems billions of years ago. These objects drift through the galaxy, occasionally passing through star systems by chance. If some of them were probes launched by civilizations long extinct, they might still be functioning, running on programmed instructions, observing and recording data they'll never transmit home, because home no longer exists. 3IATLAS could be a ghost probe, a relic of a dead civilization, completing a mission that lost its purpose eons ago. That's almost more melancholic than the Dark Forest scenario. At least with Dark Forest, there's intent, agency, threat. Ghost probes are just remnants, echoes of intelligence that once existed and now doesn't. They speak to the fragility of civilizations, the idea that even species advanced enough to achieve interstellar travel can collapse, be destroyed, or fade away. If we're finding their artifacts, it suggests the galaxy might be full of ruins, archaeological sites we haven't learned to recognize yet because we're looking for active signals, not silent monuments. Loeb's paper doesn't explore that angle much. It focuses on the tactical scenario. If 3IATLAS is active and intelligent, what might it do next? The possibilities range from benign observation to active interference. It could deploy smaller probes to study Earth's biosphere, atmosphere, and technological signatures. It could already be transmitting data back to its origin, updating its creators on what it's found. Or, in the worst-case interpretation, it could be assessing threats and preparing a response. The idea that humanity might be viewed as a threat by an extraterrestrial intelligence is both absurd and terrifying. We can barely manage our own planet. We have no interstellar travel capability. We're not expanding into the galaxy. What threat could we pose but from a sufficient, advanced perspective? Threat isn't about current capability. It's about potential. Humanity went from first powered flight to landing on the moon in 66 years. From the first nuclear weapon to a global arsenal in decades. Our technological growth is exponential. A civilization observing us might not care what we can do now. They care what we could do in 1,000 years, 10,000 years. And if the answer is we could become a competitor or a danger, then preemptive action becomes rational. This is the logic of the dark forest. You don't wait for the other hunter to become strong. You strike while they're weak. It's cold, ruthless, and it assumes a universe of zero-sum competition. But it's also potentially the reason we haven't detected obvious signs of widespread galactic civilizations. They're all hiding, or they've all been eliminated by those who hid better. Loeb doesn't advocate for panic. His position is that we should observe, gather data, and be prepared to respond if necessary. If 3IATLAS turns out to be natural, we've learned something about interstellar objects and planetary system formation. If it turns out to be artificial, we've gotten an early warning that we're not alone, and we need to start thinking seriously about how we present ourselves to a universe that might not be friendly. Either outcome is valuable. The criticism that Loeb is fear-mongering or seeking attention misses the point. The question isn't whether he's right about 3IATLAS. Specifically, the question is whether the possibility of extraterrestrial probes in our solar system is something we should prepare for, think about, and develop protocols around, because if it's not 3IATLAS, it'll be the next interstellar object or the one after that. The Vera Rubin Observatory is about to come online, and it's going to find interstellar visitors at a rate of maybe several per year. If even a small fraction of them are artificial, we need frameworks for identifying them and deciding what to do. Ignoring the possibility because it's uncomfortable or because proposing it invites ridicule is not a strategy. It's denial. Physics and energy. Hyperdimensional solar system theory. Now we enter territory where mainstream science stops following and where the maps get strange. David Sereta's hyperdimensional solar system model isn't taught in universities. It won't appear in peer-reviewed astrophysics journals, but it makes predictions, numerical predictions, and some of those predictions align with observable data in ways that are difficult to dismiss as pure chance. Whether that means the model describes reality, or whether it's a case of fitting enough parameters to make any pattern appear, is the central question. And it's a question without a clear answer. The foundation of the model is the number 591, not 591.5. 91 exactly. This number, Sereta claims, represents the orbital period in Earth days of a hypothetical planet located between Mars and the asteroid belt. Planet 591 doesn't exist in any official catalog. No telescope has ever imaged it. But when you take 591 and divide it repeatedly by the golden ratio, 1.618, you generate a sequence of numbers that correspond, sometimes with eerie accuracy, to the orbital periods of known planets. And significant resonances in the solar system start with 591 divided by phi. You get 365.258. Earth's actual sidereal orbital period is 365.256 days. The match is within 0.002 days. That's not approximate. That's nearly exact. Coincidence, maybe, but it's a very specific coincidence. Now keep dividing. The next number down is 225.7, which is close to Venus's orbital period of 224.7 days. Then 139.5, and Mercury's orbit is 87.97 days, which doesn't match as cleanly but is within a ratio relationship. The pattern continues outward as well. Multiply 591 by phi, and you start approaching the periods of the outer planets, though the matches become less precise as you move away from the central value. Sarita's claim is that 591 is the harmonic center of the solar system, the axis around which everything else rotates. Literally and figuratively, he connects this to the golden ratio because phi appears throughout natural systems, the spiral of galaxies, the arrangement of leaves on a stem, the proportions of the human body. If the solar system is organized according to phi, then finding a central frequency and scaling it by phi should reveal the structure. And to some extent it does, at least for the inner planets. The outer planets are where the model gets more speculative. Sarita proposes 9 additional planets or orbital zones that correspond to angelic hierarchies, described in Christian cosmology and in Dante's Paradiso: the seraphim, the cherubim, the thrones, the dominions, the virtues, the powers, the principalities, the archangels, and the angels. Each of these is assigned an orbital period calculated by continuing the phi division or multiplication sequence. From 591, most of these orbital periods don't correspond to any known objects, but some fall suspiciously close to resonances, orbital ratios, where gravitational interactions create stable or unstable zones. Dante wrote the Paradiso around 1321. In it, he describes the cosmos as a series of 9 celestial spheres, each associated with a different order of angels and with specific virtues. Dante was working with the Ptolemy, the geocentric model where Earth is at the center and everything revolves around it. But the numerical structure he describes has parallels to modern orbital mechanics, when you adjust the reference frame. Sarita argues that Dante was encoding information, possibly received through visionary experience, possibly through transmission from a non-human intelligence, about the true structure of the solar system. And now, 704 years later, 3IATLAS appears and seems to be referencing the same framework. The Fibonacci numbers 5, 8, 13 fit into this model. In the sequence Sarita builds, each number corresponds to a specific orbital zone. 5 is Earth, 8 is planet 591, the dominions, 13 is what he calls the virtues, another hypothetical planet or resonant zone further out. If 3IATLAS transmitted these numbers, it's saying we understand your system. We know the hidden structure and we're pointing to the key nodes Earth, the inhabited world. 5, 91, the central axis, and 13, the outer boundary of the inner system. Now, let's be clear about the problems with this model. First, there's no observational evidence for planet 591. If a planet existed between Mars and the asteroid belt with a 591-day orbit, we would have detected it. It would perturb the orbits of asteroids. It would be visible in infrared surveys. Its gravitational influence would show up in the trajectories of Mars missions. None of that has been observed. So, either the planet doesn't exist, or it's somehow hidden, or the 591 refers not to a physical planet but to a resonance, a gravitational harmonic that affects orbits without requiring a massive body. Second, the model requires accepting that phi is a universal organizing principle, not just a mathematical curiosity. That's a metaphysical claim, not a physical one. Physics uses phi in specific contexts, like the geometry of pentagons or the properties of quasi-crystals, but it doesn't treat it as a fundamental constant, like the speed of light or Planck's constant. Elevating phi to that status requires philosophical assumptions about the nature of reality that aren't testable. Third, Fitting data to models is easy if you allow yourself enough free parameters. So, Reader's model has multiple layers of multiplication, division, rounding, and interpretation. With that much flexibility, you can make almost any set of numbers align with almost any other set if you're creative enough. This is the same critique leveled at numerology and Bible codes. If you search hard enough for patterns, you'll find them even in random data. That doesn't mean the patterns are meaningful, but, and this is a significant but, the model made a prediction inadvertently. Sarita developed the hyperdimensional framework before 3IATLAS was discovered. He published his ideas about Phi 91 and the Phi sequence earlier in 2025, based on his interpretation of ancient texts and mathematical harmonics. When 3IATLAS appeared, its rotation period turned out to be 16.16 hours, which equals 969.6 minutes, and 969 happens to be the number of years Methuselah lived in the Bible. And when you divide 969 by Earth's orbital period, you get 2.654, which is incredibly close to Phi squared, 2.618. Sarita didn't predict that 3IATLAS would have this specific rotation period, but his model, which treats these kinds of numerical relationships as significant, suddenly had a new data point that fit. That's either an extraordinary coincidence, or it's evidence that the model is capturing something real. The problem is, we can't distinguish between those two options without more data. One example isn't enough. You need multiple independent confirmations if other interstellar objects show rotation periods or orbital characteristics that align with Phi-based sequences. That would be compelling. If 3IATLAS is unique, it could just be chance. The connection to sacred architecture adds another layer. The Great Pyramid of Giza has a base perimeter of approximately 921 meters and a height of around 146 meters. The ratio of perimeter to height is close to 2 pi, which means the pyramid encodes the relationship between a circle's circumference and its radius. Some researchers argue this is intentional, that the builders understood pi and encoded it structurally. Others argue it's a natural consequence of the pyramid slope angle and the use of convenient units of measurement. Same pattern, different interpretations. Sarita points out that the angles of the three pyramids at Giza, when extended as lines into the sky, point to specific regions of the ecliptic where his proposed hyperdimensional planets would be visible. If they existed, the Great Pyramid's angle is 51 degrees, 51 minutes. Khufu's second pyramid and Menkaura's third pyramid have slightly different angles, and together they form a map of the sky that, according to Sirius, encodes the positions of hidden celestial bodies. This is not accepted by mainstream Egyptology, which generally interprets the pyramids as tombs and the angles as architectural choices related to structural stability. But if you're willing to entertain the idea that ancient civilizations had contact with or knowledge from non-human intelligences, then encoding astronomical data in monumental architecture makes sense. It's a way to preserve information across millennia. Stone lasts, oral traditions fade, writing systems change, but a pyramid aligned to cardinal directions, built with geometric precision, carries its message forward through time to anyone capable of reading it. And if 3IATLAS is arriving at the Great Pyramid angled to Earth on December 25th, that's either the universe has a sense of drama or someone is following a script written long ago. Richard C. Hoagland, who has spent decades arguing that structures on Mars and the Moon show signs of artificial origin, has weighed in on 3IATLAS as well. Hoagland's work is controversial, often dismissed as pseudoscience, but he brings a background in science communication, having worked with NASA during the Apollo era. His analysis of the October 13th date, the 108th anniversary of Fatima, hinges on harmonic resonance. 108 times 2 is 216. 216 times 2 is 432. 432 Hertz is claimed by some researchers to be a natural tuning frequency, more in harmony with human physiology and natural vibrations than the modern concert pitch of 440 Hertz. The shift from 432 to 440 as the standard A note happened in the 20th century, driven by factors ranging from orchestral preference to international standardization efforts. Whether 432 is objectively better or whether it's a preference is debated, but the number appears in multiple contexts. 432,000 is the number of years in the Kali Yuga cycle of Hindu cosmology. 432 is also related to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes roughly 25,920 years to complete one cycle. Divide that by 60, the ancient Sumerian base number system, and you get numbers in the 400s. Hoagland suggests that whoever or whatever is behind 3IATLAS understands these cycles, these harmonics, and is timing events to resonate with them: the Fatima anniversary, the perihelion date, the Christmas alignment. None of it is random. It's a composed piece, a symphony where each note is placed for maximum effect. Whether that's true, or whether we're imposing narrative onto chaos, is impossible to say. But the aesthetic is compelling. If you're going to announce your presence, doing it through synchronicity and sacred timing is more elegant than broadcasting a simple radio signal. The mathematical relationship Sirius has identified can't all be dismissed. The rotation period of 3IATLAS, matching the golden ratio squared within a fraction of a percent, is odd. But through propagation across space, this has implications for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. If life is seeded by panspermia, then the emergence of intelligence might follow similar timelines across many worlds. You could have waves of intelligence, cohorts of species that developed within the same few 100 million-year window, because they all started from seeds distributed in the same epoch. That could explain why we haven't detected signals. Maybe we're in an early wave, and the galaxy is mostly empty of advanced civilizations because life is still getting started. Or maybe we're in a late wave, and everyone else already rose and fell, leaving only ruins and dormant probes like 3IATLAS. Remote viewing claims mentioned in social media posts around 3IATLAS speculate that it's carrying microbial life and plans to drop it on Earth. This is almost certainly fantasy, but it taps into a primal fear. The idea that something from the sky could rain down and change life on Earth is ancient. Meteors were seen as omens. Comets were feared as harbingers of plague and war. Modern science mostly dismissed those fears as superstition, but panspermia suggests they might have been onto something. Not in a mystical sense, but in a literal one. Objects from space can carry biological material. It's just that most of the time that material is either destroyed on entry or so foreign that it doesn't interact with the existing biosphere. The ultimate test for 3IATLAS's biological potential would be spectroscopy, looking for specific biosignatures. Molecules like methane and oxygen together in the same spectrum would be unusual since they react and destroy each other unless continuously replenished by life. Chlorophyll or other pigments that absorb specific wavelengths of light for photosynthesis would be a smoking gun. We haven't detected anything like that, and we probably won't. But searching is how science advances. You look for the unexpected, and occasionally you find it. If 3IATLAS were to show even a hint of biological activity, the response would be immediate and intense. Every telescope would turn toward it. Funding for interception missions would materialize overnight. The paradigm would shift. Until then, the question remains hypothetical. Could 3IATLAS seed life in principle? Yes. It has the chemistry. It has the age. It has the protective ice shell. Whether it actually carries viable biological material is unknown. and will likely remain unknown unless we sample it. But the fact that we can even ask the question seriously, that panspermia is a legitimate hypothesis discussed in peer-reviewed journals, shows how far our understanding has come. This is not sterile. It's full of organic chemistry, complex molecules, and the potential for biology to spread far beyond its origin. 3IATLAS is part of that story. Whether it's carrying life or not, it's a messenger from another part of the galaxy. And the message is that the building blocks are everywhere, waiting for the right conditions to assemble into something that replicates, evolves, and eventually asks questions about where it came from. Medicine and neuroscience, the psychology of disclosure. Information controlled during periods of uncertainty reveals more about human institutions than it does about the phenomena being controlled. The pattern playing out with 3IATLAS isn't new. It's the same structure we've seen with every high strangeness event that crosses from fringe speculation into mainstream awareness. Initial discovery, excitement, official reassurances that downplay significance, data delays, leaked information that may or may not be credible, public fragmentation into believer and skeptic camps, and then a slow erosion of trust in official narratives, regardless of their accuracy. This cycle is so predictable that it's almost a playbook, and understanding why it happens requires looking at the neuroscience of belief and the sociology of information gatekeeping. Start with the government shutdown timing. On October 1st, over 15,000 NASA employees were furloughed due to a congressional budget impasse. 2 days later, 3IATLAS made its closest approach to Mars, the best observation window for high-resolution imaging and spectroscopy. The shutdown means reduced staffing, delayed data processing, and minimal public communication. From a bureaucratic standpoint, this is unfortunate but not conspiratorial. Shutdowns happen. They disrupt operations. But from a public trust standpoint, the timing creates suspicion. The human brain is wired to detect agency. This is an evolutionary adaptation. When our ancestors heard rustling in the bush, assuming it was a predator and being wrong was less costly than assuming it was wind and being wrong, we over-attribute intentionality. We see patterns and infer design even in random events. This is called hyperactive agency detection, and it's why conspiracy theories are so persistent when something significant happens, and official explanations feel inadequate. The brain fills the gap with narratives that involve deliberate action. The shutdown wasn't random bad luck. It was timed to coincide with the Mars flyby to prevent data release. Whether that's true is almost secondary to the fact that it's plausible, and plausibility is enough for the brain to latch onto. The White House question is another data point. When Stephen Miller, then Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, was asked on national television whether the president had been briefed on 3IATLAS, the question itself signaled elevation. Objects that warrant presidential briefings are objects of strategic importance. The fact that the question was public, not leaked, means someone in the media considered it legitimate to ask, and that shifts 3IATLAS from astronomical curiosity to potential policy issue. And once something becomes a policy issue, information flow changes. Decisions get made about what to release, when, and to whom. This is where the psychology gets complicated. Most scientists operating in the 3IATLAS research community are not part of a coordinated cover-up. They're analyzing data, writing papers, going through peer review. The slowness is structural, not intentional, but perception doesn't track structure when data that should be publicly available, according to NASA's own protocols, is delayed for weeks with vague explanations. And when that delay happens during a period where alternative narratives are gaining traction on social media, trust erodes. It doesn't matter if the delay is due to understaffing or technical issues. The effect is the same. Absence of information gets filled with speculate. Social media amplifies this exponentially. Reddit threads, X posts, TikTok videos. They create echo chambers where like-minded people reinforce each other's beliefs. The 3IATLAS subreddit, which barely existed in July, now has thousands of active members. They're sharing observations, analyzing images, dissecting every statement from officials, and constructing elaborate theories about what's really happening. Some of it is insightful, some of it is noise, but collectively it represents a distributed cognitive process where the crowd is trying to make sense of incomplete information. This is both valuable and dangerous. Valuable, because sometimes crowdsourced analysis catches things experts miss. Astrophotographer Simeon Schmaus processing Perseverance rover images and potentially spotting 3IATLAS before any official release is an example. The crowd has resources, time and motivation that individual researchers don't. Dangerous, because without editorial filters, misinformation spreads as fast as accurate information, sometimes faster. The Fibonacci pulse claim by David Sarita is a case study. It appeared, went viral, and now exists in a state where it's neither confirmed nor debunked. People who want it to be true cite it. People who think it's nonsense ignore it. And the truth remains unclear. The split between believers and skeptics isn't random. Research in cognitive psychology shows that belief in anomalous phenomena correlates with certain personality traits and cognitive styles. People high in openness to experience are more likely to entertain unconventional ideas. People high in pattern recognition are more likely to see connections others miss, but also more likely to see connections that aren't there. The need for cognitive closure, the desire to have definitive answers rather than live with ambiguity, drives people toward whichever explanation feels most satisfying. Whether it's "this is definitely a comet" or "this is definitely an alien probe." Scientists, contrary to the stereotype of pure rationality, are human and subject to the same biases once you've publicly stated a position. Cognitive dissonance makes it uncomfortable to change that position, even when new evidence appears. Avi Loeb is on record suggesting 3IATLAS could be artificial. His critics are on record dismissing that as sensationalism. Both sides now have reputational stakes. If Loeb is right, his critics look foolish. If he's wrong, he's confirmed as a pseudoscientist in the eyes of many. This dynamic makes objective evaluation harder, because egos are involved. The phrase, "a zero drought," and similar disaster framing appearing in unrelated scientific papers about water resources, has primed the public for crisis thinking. When that mindset encounters an ambiguous astronomical event, it's easy to map an existential threat onto it. Remote viewing posts on X claiming 3IATLAS is pulling energy from its surroundings, glowing brightly, preparing to drop microbial life on Earth. These are fantasy, but they're psychologically resonant fantasies. They tap into deep archetypes: the visitor from the sky, the herald of change, the end of the world as we know it. Carl Jung wrote about UFOs in the 1950s, not as literal craft, but as psychological phenomena. He suggested they represent projections of the collective unconscious during times of cultural anxiety. Whether UFOs are real in a physical sense is separate from their psychological reality. They symbolize something the unknown, the other, the possibility of transcendence or destruction. 3I+ fits that archetype perfectly. It's from outside, it's mysterious, and it arrived at a moment when the world feels unstable: climate change, political polarization, technological disruption. The decision about how to handle potential non-human contact is not primarily scientific, it's political, social, psychological. If 3IATLAS were definitively shown to be artificial, the response wouldn't be, "let's study it calmly." It would be panic, religious upheaval, economic disruption, and strategic maneuvering by governments trying to control the narrative. That's why, even if there were clear evidence, there would be pressure to delay disclosure, to prepare the public, to manage the message. And that pressure creates the exact conditions for leaks, rumors, and loss of trust. This is the disclosure paradox. If you release information too early without full understanding, you risk causing unnecessary panic. If you withhold information while you assess, you risk being accused of a cover-up. When the truth eventually emerges, there's no clean solution. The best case scenario is transparent communication about what is known, what is unknown, and what is being done to find out. But institutions, especially governmental ones, are bad at that kind of transparency because it requires admitting uncertainty, and uncertainty is perceived as weakness. The 50% figure, the estimate that over half of the people aware of 3IATLAS are actively seeking additional information, speaks to engagement. This isn't passive curiosity. People are invested. They're checking updates daily. They're participating in forums. They're watching the sky. That level of engagement hasn't been seen for an astronomical event since, arguably, the Shoemaker Levy 9 impact on Jupiter in '94, which was visually spectacular but posed no threat to Earth. 3IATLAS isn't visually spectacular. You need a serious telescope to see it. Yet the engagement is higher because the narrative is better. Mystery beats for sustained attention. The cognitive load of living in uncertainty is exhausting. Humans crave resolution. We want answers. The brain expends significant energy maintaining ambiguous states. That's why people gravitate toward definitive narratives, even false ones. A wrong, the answer that provides closure, feels better neurologically than no answer at all. This is why conspiracy theories are comforting in a perverse way. They provide explanatory frameworks. Everything makes sense if you accept the premise. The alternative, that the universe is chaotic and we understand very little, is harder to accept. Preparation for first contact, if that's what this is building toward, requires psychological readiness as much as technological readiness. If an extraterrestrial intelligence were revealed, the immediate questions wouldn't be about propulsion systems or communication protocols. They'd be about meaning. What does this mean for humanity's place in the cosmos? What does it mean for religion? What does it mean for our future? Those are existential questions, and they don't have easy answers. Different cultures, different belief systems would respond differently. Some would see it as fulfillment of prophecy. Others would see it as threat. Others still would see it as opportunity. The reaction patterns during COVID-19 offer a preview. Faced with a novel threat, the public split into factions. Those who trusted official guidance. Those who thought it was overblown. Those who thought it was a conspiracy. Information warfare. Competing narratives. Erosion of shared reality. If 3IATLAS turns out to be more than a comet, expect the same dynamics but amplify. Because this time it's not a terrestrial virus, it's something from beyond, which carries symbolic weight that pandemics don't. The mental health implications of disclosure are under-discussed. If humanity learns it's not alone that we're possibly being observed or have been observed, the psychological impact would be profound for some. It would be liberating. Confirmation that the universe is alive and we're part of something larger. For others, it would be terrifying loss of agency vulnerability. The realization that we're not in control. Anxiety, depression, existential dread. These would spike suicide rates might increase. Among those who can't integrate the new reality, or conversely meaning might increase. Purpose might increase if people interpreted contact as a call to action, to improve, to prepare to prove ourselves worthy of joining a galactic community. Therapy frameworks for processing existential disruption exist, but aren't widely known terror management theory. The psychological discipline studying how humans cope with mortality awareness would be relevant. If 3IATLAS represents contact, it also represents a kind of death. The death of human centrality, the death of the worldview, where we're unique and special. Mourning that loss while adapting to a new reality is a process, and not everyone will navigate it successfully. Support systems, counseling community, these become critical. The fact that these discussions are happening now preemptively is itself interesting. We're rehearsing for an outcome that may not occur. Atlas might fade away. Just another comet, and all this psychological preparation will have been for nothing. Or not for nothing, because the exercise of thinking through how we'd respond, and what it would mean what we do that's valuable regardless. It reveals our assumptions, our fears, our hopes. It forces us to confront questions we normally avoid. What is humanity? What is consciousness? What is our role in the universe? Those questions don't require aliens to answer, but aliens make them urgent in a way philosophy doesn't. Psychology and behavior. Why we see patterns. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine running on approximately 20 watts of power, searching for order and chaos, because order means predictability, and predictability means survival. This machinery served us well on the African savanna, recognizing that 3 claw marks on a tree meant a predator was near, that certain cloud formations meant rain, that the behavior of prey animals signaled danger. These pattern-matching abilities kept our ancestors alive, but in the modern world, especially when confronted with ambiguous astronomical data and cryptic signals from interstellar objects, that same machinery can lead us astray, finding meaning where none exists, or, more troubling, missing meaning that's actually there. Apophenia is the technical term for seeing patterns in random data. It's not a disorder. It's a feature of cognition. The threshold for pattern detection is calibrated low, because false positives seeing a threat that isn't there are less costly than false negatives missing a threat that is there. Get startled by wind in the grass 100 times. You're fine. Ignore the one time it's actually a lion. You're not fine. This asymmetry shapes perception. We're biased toward detecting agency, intention, and structure, even when what we're looking at is noise. The Fibonacci sequence triggers this response particularly strongly because it appears throughout nature's sunflowers, pine cones, nautilus, shells, galaxy spirals. They all exhibit Fibonacci spirals, or golden ratio proportions. When David Sarita claims 3IATLAS transmitted the numbers 5, 8, 13, the Fibonacci sequence. It resonates because those numbers feel special. They're not arbitrary. They emerge from a simple recursive rule. Each number is the sum of the previous 2, and that rule generates a sequence that approximates phi as you progress. The fact that nature uses this pattern suggests it's mathematically efficient and optimal solution to certain growth and packing problems. But here's the trap. Once you start looking for Fibonacci numbers, you find them everywhere, even in places where they're coincidental. The human visual system is particularly susceptible to this show. Someone a spiral and ask if it matches the golden ratio. They'll say yes, even if it's off by 10%. We round toward the pattern. We expect this is called confirmation bias. Evidence that supports our hypothesis is weighted more heavily than evidence that contradicts it. Sarita has a framework where Fibonacci numbers and 5 relationships are meaningful. When 3IATLAS's rotation period works out to a number close to 5 squared, that confirms the framework when other measurements don't fit as cleanly. They're ignored or explained away. The same mechanism applies to the Fatima connection. October 13th is historically significant. Yes, the miracle of the sun in 1917 was witnessed by tens of thousands. But October 13th is also just another day. If 3IATLAS had reached a key orbital milestone on October 14th or 12th, someone would have found a different historical event to connect it to. There are enough significant dates scattered through history that any given day can be linked to something. If you search hard enough, the White House cornerstone on October 13th, 1792, sure, But that's also the day thousands of unremarkable things happened. Picking one event and calling it synchronicity requires deciding in advance that synchronicity is what you're looking for. This doesn't mean all pattern recognition is false. Sometimes patterns are real. The challenge is distinguishing genuine signal from noise, and there's no perfect method. Statistical analysis helps if the probability of an event occurring randomly is less than 1 in 1,000. It warrants attention, but probability can be misleading when you're not accounting for all the ways you could have defined the pattern. This is the multiple comparisons problem. If you test 100 hypotheses, you expect 5 to show significance at the 0.05 level. Purely by chance, unless you correct for those multiple tests, you'll overinterpret random fluctuations as meaningful. The rotation period of 3IATLAS at 969.6 minutes is a good example. Methuselah lived 969 years. That's a match, but only if you round. The actual rotation period has uncertainty, plus or minus 3 minutes, which converts to about 0.05 hours. So, it could be 966 minutes or 972 minutes. If it were 972, would we connect it to anything? Probably not, because 972 doesn't immediately map to a culturally significant number. The fact that 969 does is what makes it stick in memory. We're selecting for matches and ignoring misses. The golden ratio squared is 2.618. Dividing 969 by Earth's orbital period gives 2.654. That's within 1.4%. Close, but not exact. In engineer, 1% is often the threshold for calling something a match. In numerology, anything within 5% counts. The flexibility in how we define close enough allows almost any number to be connected to almost any other number through multiplication, division, and selective rounding. David Sarita's hyperdimensional model uses this flexibility extensively. That doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, but it does mean the model's predictions aren't as tight as they initially appear. Religious significance is another pattern overlay. The fact that perihelion occurs near the date traditionally associated with the Prophet Muhammad's birth, that the object will be a Great Pyramid angle to Earth on Christmas. These are striking if you assign religious events cosmic importance, but from a secular astronomical perspective, they're coincidences. Earth's calendar is arbitrary. We could have defined our year to start at a different point and divided it into different months, and none of the celestial mechanics would change. The synchronicity exists only because we've imposed a human timekeeping system onto the cosmos and are now surprised when cosmic events line up with our holidays. Yet, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting, if an intelligence wanted to communicate with humanity and understood our cultural frameworks, using our calendar and our religious symbolism would be effective. It bypasses scientific gatekeepers and speaks directly to the part of human psychology that responds to meaning and narrative. A radio signal at 1,420 megahertz, the hydrogen line, is scientifically elegant but emotionally inert. A visual apparition on Christmas Day at Great Pyramid angle is scientifically ambiguous but emotionally overwhelming. If the goal is to be noticed, to be remembered, to spark action, the latter works better. This is why the debate over 3IATLAS is so fractious. You have two equally valid epistemological approaches colliding. The scientific approach says, show me reproducible data, mechanical explanations, falsifiable predictions. The symbolic approach says, look at the synchronicities, the numerology, the mythological resonances. These aren't compatible frameworks. They're asking different questions and valuing different types of evidence, and neither side is purely right or purely wrong. Science discovers physical laws but often misses meaning. Symbolism finds meaning but often lacks rigor. Ideally, you'd integrate both, using scientific methods to verify whether symbolic patterns have physical correlates, But that requires intellectual humility from both camps, and humility is in short supply. Pareidolia, seeing faces or shapes in random, is closely related to apophenia. The Mars rover images of 3IATLAS that some people interpret as showing a cylindrical structure are likely pareidolia, low-resolution images, heavy processing, stacking multiple frames. All of this introduces facts. Our visual cortex is primed to detect edges, symmetry, and geometric regularity, because those usually indicate objects of interest, tools, predators, other humans. When we see a blur that's vaguely elongated, the brain fills in details that aren't there. It's a cigar-shaped craft. In reality, it's probably just motion blur from the comet's movement relative to the camera, exactly as Avi Loeb explained when he analyzed the Perseverance rover images. The cave art comparisons are even more tenuous. Someone posted side-by-side images of the alleged cylindrical 3IATLAS and ancient rock art showing elongated oval shapes. The implication is that ancient humans saw the same object that 3IATLAS, or something like it, has visited before. This is compelling as mythology, but weak as evidence. Ancient humans drew all sorts of shapes. Some are representational, depicting animals or people. Some are abstract, exploring form for its own sake. Picking one petroglyph that vaguely resembles a modern photograph of a blurry object proves nothing. It's retroactive pattern matching. The dark forest hypothesis taps into primal survival fears, and that's why it's so sticky as an idea. The universe is a dangerous place where silence equals survival. Is the cosmic version of don't go out at night. There are predators. It maps onto childhood fears of the dark, of the unknown. Evolutionary psychology suggests we're predisposed to fear the dark because that's when predators hunted. Extending that fear to the cosmic scale feels natural. If the universe is a dark forest, then every interstellar object is a potential threat until proven otherwise. It's fear-driven reasoning, which doesn't make it wrong, but does make it susceptible to overinterpretation. The alternative, that the universe is largely benign or indifferent, doesn't trigger the same emotional response. It's boring. A comet is just a comet. Nothing to fear, nothing to wonder about. Psychologically, humans need narrative tension. We need stakes. A universe where nothing matters and we're alone is existentially bleak. A universe where we're being watched, possibly threatened, possibly contacted, is at least interesting. Even if the threat is real, it's preferable to meaninglessness for many people. This is why apocalyptic narratives are popular. The end of the world gives life urgency and importance. Social media algorithms exploit this. Posts that generate engagement, shares, comments, likes, are amplified. Posts that make people feel something, fear or curiosity, outperform posts that are neutrally informative. So content about 3IATLAS that frames it as a mystery, a threat, or a revelation spreads faster than content that says it's probably just a comet, and here's the spectroscopy data. This creates information asymmetry. The sensational narratives dominate attention, even if they're less accurate. And once a narrative is established, correcting it is difficult because the correction doesn't generate the same emotional engagement. The ex-post claiming remote viewing of 3IATLAS, describing it as ancient alien tech, pulling energy from its surroundings, is performance. The person posting it may believe it, or they may be engaging in creative speculation, or they may be deliberately trolling. But the post function is to provoke reaction. It's designed to be shared, screenshot, discussed. Whether it's true is almost irrelevant to its success as a meme. This is how information ecosystems work now. Truth value and attention value are decoupled. Something can be false but viral or true, but ignored. The educational response to this should be teaching critical thinking and media literacy, but those are slow interventions in real time. A speculation about 3IATLAS accelerates. There's no mechanism to pump the brakes. Each person interprets new information through their existing beliefs. If you think it's a comet, every data point is interpreted as confirming that. If you think it's alien, every anomaly is confirmation. Middle ground. I don't know yet. Is cognitively uncomfortable and socially unrewarding. You can't build a community around "we're waiting for more data." You build communities around shared conviction. This is why Avi Loeb's approach, ranking 3IATLAS at a 6 on a scale of 0 to 10, is useful. It acknowledges uncertainty while still taking the question seriously. It's a framework for updating beliefs as evidence changes. If 3IATLAS shows non-gravitational acceleration, that can't be explained. It moves to an 8 if it remains on a ballistic trajectory and fades into the distance. It drops to a 4. This kind of Bayesian updating, adjusting probability estimates based on new information, is how science should work. But it requires comfort with ambiguity. And most people, including many scientists, are not comfortable there. The human need for closure drives premature conclusions. We want to know now what 3IATLAS is not in December, when it emerges from behind the sun. Not in February, when juice data is downlinked, but now that impatience leads to over-reliance on incomplete data. We form strong opinions on weak evidence because strong opinions feel better than suspended judgment. And once formed, those opinions are sticky. Changing your mind feels like admitting you were wrong, which threatens ego. So people dig in even when new evidence should shift their position. All of this, the pattern seeking the emotional reasoning, the confirmation bias. The social dynamics is not a bug in human cognition. It's a feature. These are adaptive strategies that work most of the time in most contexts. The problem is that they are adapted for a world of immediate threats and face-to-face communities, not for global information networks. And ambiguous astronomical phenomena, we're running Savannah-era software on 21st century hardware, and it shows the glitches are predictable. We see patterns that aren't there, miss patterns that are polarized into tribes, and lose the ability to hold nuanced positions. The question with 3IATLAS is whether the patterns people are detecting are real, or artifacts of how our minds work. And that's not a question psychology can answer. It requires physics, astronomy, and data, but understanding why we're drawn to certain interpretations, why the symbolic resonates more than the statistical, why coincidence feels like fate, that understanding is valuable. It lets us be skeptical of our own certainty. It reminds us that the first explanation that feels right is often wrong. And it prepares us for the possibility that we might be both over-interpreting noise and under-interpreting signal, seeing aliens where there are comets or missing aliens because we're too committed to the idea that comets are all we'll ever find. The curious corner wildest conspiracy theories. Every major anomalous event attracts a constellation of theories that range from scientifically plausible to utterly bizarre. 3IATLAS is no exception. In fact, the sheer variety of speculation surrounding this object might be unprecedented. We've got ancient alien gods, biblical prophecy, government cover-ups, AI translated messages from space, staged alien invasions, theories that connect it to everything from Knights Templar to the Philadelphia experiment. Some of this is serious speculation, from people trying to make sense of anomalous data. Some of it is creative fiction, and some of it might uncomfortably touch on truths that are stranger than the dismissive mainstream is willing to consider. Let's start with the Chilean scientist's claim that went viral in late September, according to posts on multiple platforms. Scientists in Chile, using Atlas telescope data and AI analysis, supposedly decoded a message from 3IATLAS. The message, when translated, allegedly read, "We're on our way. We've been watching you. Don't be afraid. We're going to be there soon. The post also claimed the probe is already in contact with senior global leadership, communication that hasn't been shared with the public. This spread rapidly. Thousands of shares, YouTube videos, breathless headlines. It's almost certainly false. No credible sources confirmed it. The original post provides no verifiable detail. No details, no names of scientists, no links to papers or press releases. It has all the hallmarks of creative fiction designed to go viral. But here's why it gained traction. The message is psychologically perfect. It addresses fear, don't be afraid. It confirms suspicion, we've been watching you. And it promises imminent contact. We're going to be there soon. Those three elements, reassurance, validation, and urgency, are exactly what people primed by months of speculation want to hear. Whether it's true is less important than whether it feels true. The claim about communication with senior global leadership taps into another deep vein of conspiracy thought. The idea that governments know more than they're telling, that there's a secret group with access to information the public doesn't have. This is disclosure with a capital D, the theory that extraterrestrial contact has already occurred and is being managed quietly to avoid panic. In this framework, public statements denying anything unusual are expected. Of course, they deny it. Confirming it would cause economic collapse, religious crisis, mass hysteria, so they prepare in secret, brief world leaders, coordinate responses, and feed the public a controlled narrative. Is this happening with 3IATLAS? Probably not. But the fact that Stephen Miller was publicly asked whether the president had been briefed shows the idea has reached mainstream discourse. That question wouldn't have been asked on national television if it were obviously absurd. The journalist who asked it thought it was legitimate. That shift from fringe to mentionable is significant. It means the Overton window, the range of acceptable political discussion, has moved. Extraterrestrial contact is now within the bounds of serious consideration, at least for some audiences. Mary Castee and Project Camelot have been covering 3IATLAS extensively, framing it as the return of the Anunnaki for those unfamiliar. The Anunnaki are deities in ancient Sumerian mythology, often interpreted by alternative historians like Zecharia Sitchin as extraterrestrial beings who visited Earth in antiquity and genetically engineered humans. Sitchin's work, based on his interpretations of cuneiform texts, claimed the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru, with a highly elliptical orbit that brings it into the inner solar system every few thousand years. Cassidy's claim is that 3IATLAS is either Nibiru itself or a craft associated, and that the entity Marduk, chief god of Babylon and associated with Jupiter in later mythology, is returning. This ties into prophecy beliefs. The idea that ancient texts predicted this return and that we're now witnessing it. David Sereta's mathematical analysis is cited as proof. The orbital harmonics, the phi relationships, the biblical numerology. All of it supposedly confirms that 3IATLAS is following a predetermined course, known to ancient civilizations from a mythological standpoint. It's a rich narrative. From an evidentiary standpoint, is layers of speculation stacked on speculation. Sitchin's translations are not accepted by mainstream Assyriologists, who argue he mistranslated key terms and imposed his extraterrestrial interpretation onto texts that have more mundane explanations. Nibiru, if it existed, would have gravitational effects we'd detect. No planet-sized body with an eccentric orbit periodically disrupting the inner solar system has been observed. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. And for believers, the fact that mainstream science dismisses Sitchin's work is further evidence of a cover-up. The alien mothership carrying garden probes is a more refined version of the panspermia hypothesis. Instead of accidental distribution of organic molecules, this theory proposes intentional seeding. 3IATLAS arrives, deploys smaller probes, and those probes land on planets and moons, and they either plant life directly or prepare environments for future habitation. Loeb's paper mentioned the possibility of 3IATLAS behaving like a dandelion, dispersing seeds. The imagery is evocative. A cosmic flower spreading genetic information across star systems. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. If a civilization wanted to expand but couldn't travel at relativistic speeds, sending automated garden probes makes sense. They travel slowly. It takes centuries or millennia to reach targets. But once there, they terraform, seed, and prepare worlds. By the time the civilization develops faster travel, the new worlds are ready. It's a long-game strategy. Whether any civilization would commit to such a plan, given the timescales and uncertainties, is debatable. But it's technically possible with technology only slightly beyond ours. The November-December invasion countdown on Reddit is collective anxiety, manifesting as a countdown clock. Multiple threads track days until 3IATLAS emerges from behind the sun. The framing is apocalyptic. Will it have maneuvered? Will it have deployed probes? Will Earth be targeted? This is driven partly by Loeb's calculations about potential Earth intercept windows and partly by the dark forest framing. If 3IATLAS is hostile, late November or early December is when we'd find out. The countdown creates communal tension, a shared experience of waiting for a reveal. Psychologically, this is similar to end times cults that predict specific dates for apocalypse or rapture. When the date passes without incident, believers either abandon the theory or rationalize the date was wrong. But the concept is still valid. Or it did happen, but spiritually, not physically. The flexibility of interpretative frameworks allows almost any outcome to be accommodated without falsifying the core belief. If 3IATLAS does nothing unusual, the response will be, it's waiting, or it's already completed its mission, or the real event was hidden from us. The theory becomes unfalsifiable, which removes it from scientific discourse, but doesn't diminish its psychological power. Mystery objects in Earth orbit. Not listed as spacecraft is a recurring claim. Amateur astronomers using tracking software sometimes spot objects that aren't in public satellite catalogs. This could be classified military satellites, space debris that hasn't been cataloged yet, or errors in observation. But in the context of 3IATLAS, it's interpreted as probes. If 3IATLAS deployed subcraft months ago, before we were paying close attention, those craft could now be in Earth orbit observing us. There's no hard evidence for this. Satellite tracking communities are thorough, and if there were genuinely anomalous objects, they'd be documented and analyzed. But the claim persists because it's hard to prove a negative. How do you prove there isn't a cloaked probe in orbit? The Vandenberg Air Force Base Red Square UFO from October 14, 2003, 22 years before the Fatima anniversary date in 2025, is another numerological link Serena has made. On that date, multiple witnesses, including military personnel, reported seeing a massive red square object in the sky near Vandenberg. It was never officially explained. Connecting it to 3IATLAS requires believing that the same intelligence has been operating near Earth for decades, occasionally revealing itself, and that the 22-year gap is significant. In Serena's framework, it relates to harmonic frequencies and Fatima symbolism, since October 14th is one day after October 13th. This is numerology at its most flexible. Any two events can be connected if you allow enough degrees of freedom. But for people already convinced there's a pattern, each new connection reinforces belief. It's a web of meaning where every thread supports every other thread. Pulling one thread doesn't collapse the web. It just tightens elsewhere. This makes the theory resilient but also untestable. If everything is connected, then nothing can falsify the connection. The Jeffrey Epstein files distraction theory is more cynical. It posits that the 3IATLAS story was floated by intelligence agencies to divert public attention from politically damaging revelations. The timing is suspicious. 3IATLAS discovered in July. Epstein-related documents released around the same time. Major news cycles competing for attention. In this view, astronomical phenomena are tools of information warfare. Got a story you want buried. Release something exotic to dominate headlines. Havelock addressed this directly, pointing out that 3IATLAS is a physical object, observable by anyone with a decent telescope. It exists independently of terrestrial politics. The fact that its discovery coincided with other news is just that, coincidence. But the theory persists, because it fits a worldview where nothing is random, where powerful actors manipulate everything, where the surface narrative always hides a deeper truth. It's exhausting to live in that worldview, but it's also seductive. It makes you feel informed, awake while everyone else is asleep. Project Bluebeam is the granddaddy of fake alien invasion theories, originally proposed by journalist Serge Monast in the 1990s. It claims that global elites plan to stage a false alien contact event using holograms, advanced aircraft, and media manipulation. The goal is to create a common threat that justifies world government, centralized control, and suppression of individual freedoms. In the Bluebeam scenario, 3IATLAS would be part of the setup, a real object, but one whose nature is being misrepresented to prepare the public for a staged reveal. When the fake aliens appear, people will believe it, because they've been primed by months of speculation about 3IATLAS. This theory requires an almost omnipotent level of coordination among global powers, which is implausible given how fractious international relations actually are. But it resonates because it explains anomalies. Why are governments being evasive about 3IATLAS? Because they're managing the narrative for Bluebeam. Why is data being delayed? To allow time for fabrication. Any evidence can be incorporated. Real anomalies are part of the script. Lack of anomalies means the script is working. It's a closed loop. The belief that we're being prepared for stage disclosure through incremental revelations has some merit. Though, even without invoking Bluebeam, if governments did have evidence of extraterrestrial life or technology, sudden full disclosure would be disruptive, a gradual process hinting and allowing speculation. Releasing ambiguous data, this builds tolerance. By the time official confirmation comes, it's anticlimactic. Everyone already half believed it. This is how normalization works. The fringe becomes mainstream, not through definitive proof, but through repeated exposure. 3IATLAS, regardless of what it actually is, functions as a normalization event for the idea that interstellar objects might be artificial. Whether that normalization is accidental or intentional is the question. Occam's razor suggests accidental. 3IATLAS is a comet. It has weird properties because comets are variable, and people are reading too much into it. But Occam's razor is a heuristic, not a law. The simplest explanation is often, but not always, correct. And in situations involving intelligence, whether human or non-human, simple explanations can miss deception. If you're trying to hide, you make your probe look like a comet. If you're trying to manage public reaction, you release data slowly. Both strategies make the simple explanation. It's just a comet, and the government is just slow, appear correct even when they're not. The difficulty is distinguishing genuine conspiracy from pattern-seeking and randomness. Some conspiracies are real MK Ultra, Watergate, Tuskegee experiments. These happened. Governments and organizations do coordinate in secret, manipulate information, and lie. But most conspiracy theories are wrong. The challenge is developing filters that catch real conspiracies without falling for false ones. It requires skepticism in both directions, skeptical of official narratives, but also skeptical of alternative. Most people pick a side and stick with it. Trust authorities always, or distrust authorities always. Neither strategy is optimal. With 3IATLAS, the optimal strategy is to wait for more data while entertaining multiple possibilities. It's probably a comet. It might be artificial. It could be something in between. A natural object with properties we don't yet understand. The wilder theories, Anunnaki, blue beam, alien motherships, they're less likely, but not impossible. Assigning rough probabilities helps. Comet, 9. 90%. Artificial probe, 5%. Exotic natural phenomenon, 4%. Elaborate hoax or psyop, 1%. As new data arrives, adjust. If 3IATLAS maneuvers, artificial jumps to 80%. If it fragments naturally, comet goes to 99%. This keeps your thinking flexible without abandoning judgment entirely. And right now, with the object hidden behind the sun and data delayed, flexibility is the most honest position anyone can hold. The Curious Corner. Wildest conspiracy theories. Every major anomalous event attracts a constellation of theories that range from scientifically plausible to utterly bizarre. 3IATLAS is no exception. In fact, the sheer variety of speculation surrounding this object might be unprecedented. We've got ancient alien gods, biblical prophecy, government cover-ups, AI translated messages from space, staged alien invasions, and theories that connect it to everything from Knights Templar to the Philadelphia experiment. Some of this is serious speculation from people trying to make sense of anomalous data. Some of it is creative fiction, and some of it might uncomfortably touch on truths that are stranger than the dismissive mainstream is willing to consider. Let's start with the Chilean scientist claim that went viral in late September. According to posts on multiple platforms, scientists in Chile using ATLAS telescope data and AI analysis supposedly decoded a message from 3IATLAS. The message, when translated, allegedly read, "We're on our way. We've been watching you. Don't be afraid. We're going to be there soon." The post also claimed the probe is already in contact with senior global leadership. Communication that hasn't been shared with the public. This spread rapidly. Thousands of shares. YouTube videos, breathless headlines, it's almost certainly false. No credible source has confirmed it. The original post provides no verifiable details, no names of scientists, no links to papers or press releases. It has all the hallmarks of creative fiction designed to go viral. But here's why it gained traction. The message is psychologically perfect. It addresses fear. Don't be afraid. It confirms suspicion. We've been watching you. And it promises imminent contact. We're gonna be there soon. Those three elements, reassurance, validation, and urgency, are exactly what people primed by months of speculation want to hear. Whether it's true is less important than whether it feels true. The claim about communication with senior global leadership taps into another deep vein of conspiracy thought. The idea that governments know more than they're telling, that there's a secret group with access to information the public doesn't have. This is disclosure with a capital D. The theory that extraterrestrial contact has already occurred and is being managed quietly to avoid panic. In this framework, public statements denying anything unusual are expected. Of course they deny it. Confirming it would cause economic collapse, religious crisis, mass hysteria. So they prepare in secret, brief world leaders, coordinate responses, and feed the public a controlled narrative. Is this happening with 3IATLAS? Probably not. But the fact that Stephen Miller was publicly asked whether the president had been briefed shows the idea has reached mainstream discourse. That question wouldn't have been asked on national television if it were obviously absurd. The journalist who asked it thought it was legitimate. That shift from fringe to mentionable is significant. It means the Overton window, the range of acceptable political discussion, has moved. Extraterrestrial contact is now within the bounds of serious consideration, at least for some audiences. Carrie, Cassidy, and Project Camelot have been covering 3IATLAS extensively, framing it as the return of the Anunnaki. For those unfamiliar, the Anunnaki are deities in ancient Sumerian mythology, often interpreted by alternative historians like Zecharia Sitchin as extraterrestrial beings who visit the Earth in antiquity and genetically engineered humans. Sitchin's work, based on his interpretations of cuneiform texts, claimed the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru with a highly elliptical orbit that brings it into the inner solar system every few thousand years. Cassidy's claim is that 3IATLAS is either Nibiru itself or a craft associated with it, and that the entity Marduk, chief god of Babylon and associated with Jupiter in later mythology, is returning. This ties into prophecy beliefs, the idea that ancient texts predicted this return and that we're now witnessing it. David Series' mathematical analysis is cited as proof the orbital harmonics, the phi relationships, the biblical numerology. All of it supposedly confirms that 3IATLAS is following a predetermined course known to ancient civilizations. From a mythological standpoint, it's a rich narrative. From an evidentiary standpoint, it's layers of speculation stacked on speculation. Sitchin's translations are not accepted by mainstream Assyriologists, who argue he mistranslated key terms and imposed his extraterrestrial interpretation onto texts that have more mundane explanations. Nibiru, if it existed, would have gravitational effects we'd detect. No planet-sized body with an eccentric orbit periodically disrupting the inner solar system has been observed. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. And for believers, the fact that mainstream science dismisses Sitchin's work is further evidence of a cover-up. The alien mothership carrying garden probes is a more refined version of the panspermia hypothesis. Instead of accidental distribution of organic molecules, this theory proposes intentional seeding. 3IATLAS arrives, deploys smaller probes. Those probes land on planets and moons, and they either plant life directly or prepare environments for future habitation. Loeb's paper mentioned the possibility of 3IATLAS behaving like a dandelion dispersing seeds. The imagery is evocative. A cosmic flower spreading genetic information across star systems. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. If a civilization wanted to expand but couldn't travel at relativistic speeds, sending automated Gardner probes makes sense. They travel slowly, take centuries or millennia to reach targets. But once there, they terraform, seed, and prepare worlds.